Welcome to Pulpcast, the official podcast of thepulpmedia.com. In this podcast, we discuss everything in pulp culture, from comic books to movies and video games. This week, we're excited to bring you an interview with Jim Zub, writer of Wayward at Image and the newly announced Thunderbolts at Marvel. So yeah, you've had a really busy day, huh?
Yeah, it's been a bit of an insane week. Having fun, though. Comic books, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and you've written a lot. Like you're on your bio, I just was going through it because you posted on Twitter, and I didn't realize that you had written that much.
Yeah, I think, the weird thing about comics, they joke around, but I think it's true with a lot of creative careers where they say it's like, 10 years overnight sensation, where all of a sudden, you put in a certain amount of work and then all of a sudden you reach a certain kind of fever pitch where people start to remember the name or they see the stuff and realize that was you all along kind of thing. So I don't know if I'm blowing up because that sounds really corny and egotistical, but there's definitely, like I put in the hours, let's put it that way. So a lot of different projects over the last, 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and of a good variety too. Like, I mean, they kind of all revolve around fantasy, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Right.
But there's some like superhero stuff there, and like Samurai Jack. I don't know. I guess you could kind of classify that as fantasy.
That's fantasy notes in there.
Right.
There's definitely an action element, and there's sort of like a big kind of I like to make entertaining books. I like to make fun books. I love supernatural and fantasy stuff, obviously, and that permeates a lot of the work that I've done. So
good. So let's start with the news of the day. Let's talk about Thunderbolts.
Sure.
If you're not sick of it already.
Not something I thought I'd be talking about already. So it's just those, things. Yeah, they just literally announced a handful of hours ago that I'm taking over the new, they're launching a new Thunderbolts book this spring. They haven't set an exact date, like, publicly, so I can't really talk too much beyond what's been covered in the initial announcement. But, I'm really, really stoked for it, and can't wait for people to see what we've got cooking. It's gonna be a wild time.
So bare bones, it's a villain book? They have been in the past.
Right. The Thunderbolts traditionally have been kind of morally gray at best. So they're villains who are trying to be heroes, or they're heroes who have fallen into villainy, sort of mixtures of these things depending on which iteration of the team you're looking at.
Right.
The original ones were back in the late 90s, was basically the Masters of Evil, these really big Avengers villains who were pretending to be heroes so that they can ingratiate themselves to the public and kind of put themselves in a sweet spot and then, reveal their villainy. But over the course of doing that, some of them realized they actually really liked being heroes, liked doing the right thing. And when push came to shove, some of them kind of rebelled and decided to be heroic after all. And so obviously that was then, and there's still elements of that, and some of these characters are from that original team, but they've got a different mission now, and sort of we're using some of the big broad themes of that, but I can't really go into details in terms of how just yet.
Of course. Could you give just a really quick rundown of the roster, if you can, and then we'll move on to something else since you can't really divulge a whole lot.
So the leader of the new team is the Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, who even if you're not a comic fan, you now know him from the movie, The Winter Soldier. So he's obviously he was never part of the Thunderbolts before, but he really fits well with that kind of mandate where you've got someone who has been a villain, has done, bad things, and is now sort of on this redemption track or trying to figure out, where they go from there. So he's a really good fit on that front. It's frustrating because it's like people are asking a lot about the cast right now. So in that cast picture, you've got Atlas, you've got Moonstone, you've got Mach 7, the Fixer, and there's a new character as well who has not, like that young girl who's in the shot.
Right.
They haven't said anything about her yet, so I can't really speak to any details of her.
Okay. Is it safe to say that the roster could expand? Is this just kind of like the the first at bats, and then you're going to drag more people
Yeah,
on?
this is sort of the launch group, and based on the mission that they've got and what they're going to be going up against, there's definitely room for there's going to be other characters coming into it, and so some of these are going to be, I know a lot of people have got kind of favorite old Thunderbolts characters that they're asking about who may be making a return or making an appearance in some way, and then there's also other characters who kind of fall into that morally gray area of anti-hero or making tough choices kind of stuff. So yeah, we got all sorts of cool ideas for who's coming down the pipe and how they're going to tie into some really big, awesome stuff that's happening in kind of the Avengers and Captain America and everything kind of related to that.
Awesome. It does sound really exciting. I saw it today. Actually, it was trending on Facebook. I don't know if you've seen that.
I didn't know. Yeah. The crazy thing is that the timing for the announcement was just brutal in terms of I had a bunch of other stuff I'd lined up today. And so I saw just like my Twitter exploding and my email notifications were going off. And I would sort of tuck my head in every so often and be like, thanks. And then I would go back to other stuff I had on the go. So I'm going to hopefully be able to take stock at some point this weekend.
Catch your breath.
Really, get a look at, oh man, this was crazy, It's funny because, you want to thank everyone and respond to every single message, but then you also realize, I gotta get work done too. So it's kind of funny that way.
Excellent. So let's talk about your image stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's probably where, some people, this Marvel announcement is sort of going to be their first time they maybe have heard my name, but most people in the industry probably know me from the image stuff I've done.
Yeah, I got started.
I did some comic work before that, but for the majority of people, I think the image stuff, it was kind of stuff that put me on the map a bit.
Definitely. For me, it was Skull Kickers. I don't remember where I heard about it, but I picked up, and I think I've read about half of it. They're kind of hard to track down where I lived, so it's still a quest that I'm on.
It's the beauty of digital.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, yeah.
And then with Wayward, that totally clicked.
Oh, cool.
It was totally something that resonated. And I've interviewed you before through email about Wayward, and we've kind of talked about how it's an American manga, if you will.
Yeah, I hesitate to use the term because, I think it's an American-style comic that's set in Japan and uses Japanese mythology as its core. Some people, that's a really loaded term if you say manga because they're
right.
Like, well, you're not Japanese or whatever. And so I really do look at it as an American comic. And, Steve, the artist on it, he lives in Japan. We're trying to really do right by the cultural stuff and make sure that we deliver something faithful in terms of the way we portray Tokyo and the way we portray Japanese culture, which in some cases, not that manga doesn't, of course, but, we're really grounded in terms of the city, let's put it that way. And we really go to extra lengths, but that doesn't necessarily make it a manga per se,
Right. Yeah, that's fair. And so you've pitched it as, or I've heard you pitch it as Buffy kind of meets Hellboy, or some variations of the two.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask, how has it evolved from your kind of initial concept through to publication to where it is now? Has anything changed dramatically? Has anything, just kind of stood the test of time in that idea?
Well, the pitch in how you sell it to people initially is always going to be different than even the story planning. So I knew we weren't just doing teenagers fighting supernatural monsters. Like I knew we had bigger themes and kind of broader stuff we wanted to talk about in terms of mythology. But there's no point in sort of saying that to people before the books even come out. You know what I mean? Like, hey, let me heap all this intense kind of, mythological thought process on you. It's a lot easier to say, hey, it's like Buffy, these teenagers are fighting monsters, you're going to really like it. You know what I mean? And if you like Buffy, if you like that kind of feel, you'll enjoy this. And I think that was still a really safe bet in terms of selling the concept to a readership. And then they get invested in it and they go, oh, this isn't just Buffy stuff. You're like, no, not at all. We're going deeper. We're doing different things. We're not just trying to use that exact same formula. We're trying to really make this book its own thing and do something special on its own merits as well. So So in that way, when you say, is it different from my plan? Not really. Although, readers might assume it's different. It really is kind of what we were planning all the way along. That being said, as we go, one of the things that I did was I made sure we kind of left bits open. Like I wanted to have, here's the overarching story. Here's some of the main plot points or things we're going to work toward, but leave enough of it open that if we had cool ideas or we realized, something resonated more than we thought, we could really build on it. And that's been really fun, being able to sort of spontaneously, strengthen certain character roles or go deeper into certain elements that in the initial pitch you don't realize are going to be as much fun or going to be as, intent as you were originally thinking.
Right. It seems like the first 10 issues or the first 2 trades are really kind of like, here's the cast. So you kind of get familiar with the powers, kind of what their weaknesses are, meaning like personality or character weaknesses. Yeah. And then what you're doing now, I've noticed, is kind of digging deeper and like really getting to the heart of who these people are, what they're afraid of, what their hopes and dreams are, and then still at that same time beating up a ton of Japanese mythological beasts.
And more of what's at stake as well. I think you're getting a better sense of sort of what some of the big picture, at first it was just like, oh, okay, these monsters are after these after these kids. Well, why? Or, there's tension there, but you don't get a sense of what's at stake. And I think now you're getting the sense of, oh man, this is, the mythology itself and kind of a generational divide between the old and the new supernatural in Japan. And that's been really fun, being able to kind of up the ante and show people that, yeah, we've been planning it this way, but you just didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole goes, kind of thing.
And what I've noticed in this arc too is that there's maybe some hints of romance coming about.
Yeah, so I both for kind of thematic reasons and because it was a teen story, I didn't want it to instantly kind of delve into romance. Like, teenagers, yes, they're hormonal or whatever, but I didn't want that to be the first thing we did, and right. Now that I feel like we've established and they're fully formed characters a bit more, we can show more of that without it just seeming, I don't know, manipulative, I guess. So yeah, there is more of that that's coming into it. They're kind of starting to really gravitate towards each other in little groups, or start to trust each other more. Although I do everything in my power to kind of mess with that. It's a team book where the team. I don't know if you had a chance to read issue 13, the newest one.
Yeah, I've caught up.
So, 13's kind of the first time we've had the entire team together doing something as a unit, like all of them on the same mission doing the same thing, which is kind of crazy when you think that it took 13 issues to get to that. And even that, the reasons why they're doing it and kind of the bonds between the characters are strained because of the conflicts that, they're going through. And so I kind of like that we've got this weird team book where they're not really a team and, they don't all have unified purpose and there's no kind of Professor X just saying, okay, go over here and do this.
Yeah, and you addressed that in the first arc when Rory's kind of trying to figure out, do I step up and be the leader? Are we a team or are we just kind of these ragamuffin misfits that don't really have a place?
Literally trying to just survive. And you see a lot of that too. Just as it seemed like they might have a little bit of unity, we took away Shirai and Rory and had them on their own little kind of sub journey when they got pulled away into the weave and all that sort of stuff. So just, trying to play against expectations of what a team book is, or, how these characters all work together, trying to sort of mix up the typical kind of relationships and throw some curveballs in there.
Something I wanted to talk to you about, because I didn't really get to go that in depth with the email interview, is the powers and how unique and almost unseen they've been in other comic books, at least that I've read. I'm not really familiar with other characters having similar powers. So could you walk me through the development or the decision making in terms of whose powers or who gets what powers, and kind of you don't necessarily need to explain why, because I'm sure the story will get there, but just kind of how and what?
It was interesting. One of the things Steve and I talked about really early on was trying to make really interesting characters, and you want to have, anytime you involve any sort of whatever you're going to call it, magic or superpowers or whatever, you're going to get those superhero comparisons. You're going to get whatever, in this case, teenagers, X-Men, New Mutants kind of comparison. And so I knew I didn't want them to just have code names, and I didn't want them to just be like, okay, here's the kid that flies, and stuff like that. I knew we had to try and do something a little bit different. And so what kind of informed it for me was looking and saying, okay, can we do something, how do I put this? I'm going to ramble a bit because that's how those things tend to go. I don't know if you notice a lot of the time, especially in older comics, whenever they would have a character in a superhero comic, if they were from America, they could have kind of any power. You could just be the strong guy, or you could be based on an animal or any kind of thing. And if a character was ever from a foreign culture, they always had to be like a big, huge racial cliche. Like they had, the character who's the Native American has to be called like Eagle something, and he has to have, a very kind of cliche, sort of stereotypical ethnic background or whatever, because you couldn't just have a character be Native American if he wasn't, smoking a peace pipe and putting up a teepee or something. Really just horrendous kind of cliches. And I said, well, what if we took the kind of variety you had in American characters and powers, and we sort of filtered them through, kind of saying, what is, how do you put it? Like, how do we make powers that fulfill, or, the kind of escapism that you might have in Japan, the types of powers and things that are exemplified by their culture, but you don't have to just, the characters aren't ninjas or something. Do you know what I mean?
Right, of course.
So not just like, one of the things that makes me laugh, and Steve and I constantly joke around, we're like, none of the characters necessarily have martial arts. Like, no one is a ninja, Ayane is a really good fighter, but she's almost more of like a street scrapper or what may have you. And Naba, who's the new, Kitsune Ronin who joined them, she's probably the closest to a martial artist of anyone. And even she's quite unorthodox. You know what I mean? I wanted to avoid this idea of, well, we're in Tokyo, so we better have characters with katanas and ninja temples and things like that. That wasn't what we were going for. You know what I mean? That we were going to show sort of a broader, kind of more involved look at Tokyo as a place and Japan as a country, and show kind of the depth and breadth of it. So, something like Nikaido, most people don't think of homelessness when they think of Japan or they think of Tokyo, but there's extensive amounts of people who, are homeless in the city, just like any other big population center. And so, making Nikaido homeless and kind of this weird kid on the fringes of society was something I thought we could do as something very different, show more kind of depth and breadth to the types of characters that are in the city, just like you would have in any kind of American story.
Right. So rather than just aiming for, let's make something cool, let's make something semi-relatable. I mean.
Yeah, and it's not that there's not cool stuff, but so the powers kind of filter out of that. And so I had this idea about, this idea of not showing your emotions, or a very kind of Eastern sort of look at, well, it's a good thing to not show extreme emotions, don't get angry, don't freak out, don't cry in public, that kind of thing. And I said, well, what if you take that to an extreme and you sort of absorb emotions? You know what I mean? Like, you don't just not show them, but you literally take them away from other people or kind of bottle them up. And so it was this sort of cultural thing that turned into an idea for an ability. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and so all the characters are kind of built off of those sorts of ideas. There are tons of stray cats in Tokyo. And so Steve's original idea was to have this kind of cat girl, and the cliche of an anime cat girl, but not like a girl who's like sexual with a cat tail and cat ears. Do you know what I mean? But more of like literally a girl made from cats. And I thought, well, that's neat, and kind of, plays with this, your expectations. And so all the characters are kind of elements of that where you're taking something that could be a cliche and trying to give it a bit of a twist or pushing it in maybe a different direction or focusing on a different aspect of it to create something just a little unexpected.
What's the length you're aiming for this series?
It's tough because you got different factors at play. You've got obviously the story and everything else, but you've also got the market and what the market can bear in terms of sales and what may have you. So as much as I would love to say, oh, we're going to go 100 issues, a year from now, we've got to look and be honest about, are the sales keeping up? Are we holding our own in that way? Because at some point the bill's got to get paid. This is Steve's full-time job doing Wayward. And so if it doesn't make enough money for him to draw it, then obviously that changes the plan. That being said, we know kind of all the main beats and where the story's going. And it's the middle area that we can kind of go longer or go shorter with, depending on, how well it does and some of the other things we've got kind of planned and how the audience reacts to it. So I would love to see 30, 40 issues, that we're kind of heading into the halfway point with the end of this arc, potentially. But, the great thing about it is the yokai stuff is so robust. There's so many amazing, mythological things we can play with. And there's so many, I don't want to give anything away, but stuff that's coming down the pipe really opens it up even more where you realize we could dive even deeper into elements of the mythology in ways that I think are going to surprise people. And so if the readership responds to that and, our readership grows and people keep spreading the word on what we're doing and it goes well, then, we can keep drilling down, you know what I mean? And if they don't, or if it just other things come up, then we can kind of wrap up the main storyline in a satisfying way. And we're not going to feel like we left anyone short.
Excellent. You brought up a really interesting point. I think it is a strength of this series that the villains are just as interesting as the heroes.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was really important to me early on. I wanted to start off, that first story arc. It seems so simple. Oh, the yokai are bad and they're hunting the kids and that's all there is to it. And then with each arc, we've kind of broadened that and you realize that they've got their own motivation and maybe things aren't so simple and these kids aren't necessarily good. They're reacting to being attacked. They're defending themselves and then getting revenge and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a much more complex kind of relationship than just these are the bad guys, go get them. The one of the best stories I think of for that kind of stuff is like Princess Mononoke, where you've seen the movie?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so you've got, the people in that village, they've got technology and that they're fighting against nature because they want to have somewhere safe to live and they're building families and they have a valid reason for doing what they want to do. It just so happens that it's going to encroach on nature and the nature is fighting back and has its reasons for survival and wiping them out. So it's like two opposing worldviews as opposed to you are good, you are bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the strongest stories, I think, is when that conflict happens on both fronts.
Yeah, and I think what we've done, particularly with the third arc, is given you a sense that the yokai, sort of exemplified by the Nihurion, is they've got their reasons for doing what they're doing, and they're making broad sacrifices as well to try and, hold on and survive and keep their traditions alive. And so it's not so simple a conflict,
Definitely. Is there anything you want to tease before we move on to a different series?
Well, the end of issue 13 was big, crazy action and kind of, I think, some unexpected intensity there. And the 14 and 15 really just keep that momentum going. We've got some huge stuff coming. And in the same way that the second arc ended with a big moment that I think people were like, whoa, I was not expecting that. But now that it's happened, I can see how this kind of built. We've got one of those coming at the end of 15. And I'm really excited for people to, again, kind of wrap up the arc and anticipate what we have coming down the pipe.
Excellent. Yeah, you keep writing it, and I'll keep reading it because it's one of my favorite books.
Oh, thank you.
Speaking of favorite books, let's talk about Skull Kickers.
Sweet.
So when I started reading this, I was really surprised because I mean it was my first experience with your writing, and I knew nothing about you or really what I was getting into, but it really felt like this kind of love letter to fantasy and just like, you know, I could kind of see you at your desk being like, well, I know a lot about fantasy, so I'm going to highlight all of the stuff that's kind of ridiculous and like push it further. Is that kind of true, or is that?
It is absolutely lovely. It's a love letter to sword and sorcery as a genre. It's a love letter to like Dungeons and Dragons and kind of the kooky parts of fantasy that I think Tolkien or J.R.R. Martin probably try and shy away from, where they're like, yeah, that stuff happens, but we're doing it in a very cool way. And we're like, no, this stuff's ridiculous. Let's just embrace it whole hog and run with it, you know? And I think that weird kind of thing where, you know, your best friends can like make fun of you more on point than anyone else. Like they can just be merciless in their kind of critique of you, or because they know you and because they love you, you know, they can kind of really elbow jab. That's how I feel like fantasy. Like we're pals, so I can just be merciless, you know, and mock the things that are wonderful and tell you why you should be reading it, even while at the same time I'm kind of saying, isn't this maniacal and strange?
So you did a lot of really crazy stuff in there. I mean, right off the very bat, you're fighting, or the characters are fighting a werewolf with a pot belly, and they destroy it by shooting silver spoons through it. So what were some of your favorite?
One of the things that, you know, those first like 6 pages is our chance to basically set the tone and say, this is what we're all about. And so having that first fight scene and saying, these guys kill monsters, they're morally ambiguous, they're going to do things, unexpected things in unexpected ways. And I think that's the nice thing about it, is setting that tone right from the get-go and saying, here's what you're in for, enjoy the ride, you know? Each chapter, I think we got a little bit more ambitious and we got a little bit more ridiculous with it. You know, Edwin and Misty and I, we all got more comfortable working with each other as well. So you start to realize what you can get away with, or the kind of insanity, you know, you're building up material. And what's really nice about that in terms of comedy is with each chapter you get more bits that then you can riff on later. And that's one of the fun parts about having a longer running book like that. You know, we put together 34 issues total, so that by the time we finished, we had just this wealth of weird little in-jokes and kind of symbolism and kooky things that we built up in the series that we could, you know, rejig and reshuffle and play with over and over and over again in new configurations. And that's one of the things I really love doing in the book.
Can you, off the top of your head, pinpoint any of your favorite moments? Any favorite gigs or gigs or anything like that?
Probably one of the issues that consistently I feel like we were firing on all cylinders. There's an issue in the second story arc where the two of them are literally trying to get robbed. So they're pretending to be rich noblemen and they're wandering around because they want to find the Thieves Guild. And so they wander around this town and scream about how much money they have on them, hoping that they can get robbed. While at the same time, the gun that the big guy has, Rex, is hidden underneath the bed at their hotel. And what we've made clear in this chapter is that no one knows what a gun is, that it's not a normal item in this fantasy world. And so these guards are basically trying to disarm this gun, but they don't know what it is. And so they keep shooting themselves. And these guards keep dying and piling up in this room. And these two scenes are happening simultaneously. So there's our heroes are wandering around trying to get robbed while these poor guards are basically killing themselves trying to figure out what a gun is. And I just feel like that exemplifies the book in terms of the weirdness and the kind of inside baseball of fantasy and like the slapstick and violence that we were playing with. That's one of my favorite issues. I just feel like everything really gelled on that. All the gags pay off really well, and yeah, I'm really, really proud of that one.
Awesome. How was it working with Edwin since he was so young when you guys were collaborating?
Yeah, Edwin's Edwin was, God, I think he was 21 or 22 when we started, and he was so eager and so energetic about everything. Like he just wanted to do 110% on every page, and it drove me, like in a lot of ways, really pushed me to want more out of the book and to really, keep up with his energy. And that was a really amazing thing. The nice thing about working with someone who doesn't, that was really his first gig. He was actually still in school. He was graduating from art college when he started working on issue 1. I think his friends were pretty jealous because his first gig was an Image gig. But he didn't have any expectations in terms of how work is supposed to be done. So I would say, here's best practices. Like, you got to hand stuff in on time. You got to communicate. You got to do edits when you're given them. And he just, okay, this is how you work. And so I kind of got to build this Frankenstein monster of awesome comic artist out of him. And now to this day, every editor I talk to that's worked with him is just like, this kid's a bullet. Like, he's so good and he's so, professional and responsible. And so I feel really good about that I was sort of able to invest in him. Like, this is what's really important about working as a freelancer,
Yeah, and I think anybody who sees that book and realizes that this was drawn by a 20-year-old will kind of lose their mind a little bit.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And you see him grow too. Like, the first issues are totally awesome. And then he gets better and you're just like, whoa, I can't believe, the confidence and the strength of his work, particularly in those last few chapters.
Yeah, and I think there's good synergy between Skull Kickers and Wayward in the sense that the art's really clean and vibrant and colorful. So there's almost this kind of, stylistic resonance between the two.
Yeah, my background's in animation. That's my training. I trained as a classical animator, and I worked in the animation business for several years. And I still teach at an art college here in Toronto in their animation department. That's my day job, for lack of a better term. And so I love clean, colorful. Like, that's like very much in my kind of wheelhouse, artistically speaking. And I totally kind of glom to that as well. Whenever I'm looking for artists to work with, like, that's the kind of stuff that tends to jump out at me, is really clean storytelling, good posing, good expression, kind of more open line stuff rather than heavily rendered or crosshatch heavy kind of stuff. Like, so that's really what jumps out to me as the kind of art that I like. And so you really do tend to see that, particularly with my creator-owned stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I hunt down,
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Where did the title Skull Kickers come from?
Well, originally, so the first appearance of the Skull Kickers, although they weren't called that at the time, they appeared in this anthology that Image put together called Pop Gun. So Joe Keating, the comic writer, but at the time he was just working at Image in their press department and also as an editor. He was putting together this anthology called Pop Gun, and he ended up contacting an artist that I was working with. This is before I met Edwin, and asked if that artist wanted to contribute a story to Pop Gun. And long story short, I ended up writing that story about these two mercenary jerks getting themselves in a caper. And the artist, Chris Stevens, designed the Skull Kickers, and off we were going. And so we had a ton of fun doing this short story, but we really didn't think much beyond that. And then Eric Larson, who was the publisher at Image at the time, he was the head guy, he saw the short story, really liked it, and asked us if we wanted to do more with it. And so that's kind of where the pitch really started to gel, started to come together. We don't, we just didn't plan for that originally. And then Chris's schedule didn't allow for him to end up doing a full book. And so, I kind of shelved the thing, not being sure whether or not I was going to ever get to do it until Edwin came along. And then he was just the right fit at the right time, and he really ran with the ball. And so from there, it was like, well, now we're going to do this as a full series, just kind of brainstorming a cool title, because the original one was just, you know, these two idiots. I think it was called Two Copper Pieces, like that if you're in a fantasy world, you'd want to be gold, and these guys are just copper. They're just morons. And so that was where the title came from, just sort of brainstorming something fun and fantasy and ridiculous. I think I literally put a list together that was just like violent words and just tried to jam them together, like monster slayers and, you know, like all that kind of cliche stuff, until the word kind of skull kickers popped up, and I realized that was just had the right feel.
Yeah, it totally fits. And I think one of my favorite ones is when you did kind of those like one-off issues with the funky titles, and you had Uncanny Skull Kickers.
Yeah. People, you know, it's really funny because we got a big sales boost out of those reboot, you know, joke issues, and we got a ton of press out of them. And even now, even if people didn't read the book, they remember that gag, like that promotion, and still bring it up as like something they love. Or, man, you guys really, you know, you really took the piss out of Marvel and DC when you were making fun of all those new number ones. And what's crazy is, of course, since then, the whole idea of the reboot has just gotten more and more traction. Like, it's so much more extensive now, how many new number ones are coming out in the business. And so with every passing year, we kind of look more ridiculously awesome because of it. Like, it just seems so almost like fortune telling of what insanity is going to come, you know? And so, yeah, I'm really, really proud of that. It was one of those ideas that just kind of took on a life of its own. I was joking around that, you know, we couldn't get traction on the book because we had already so many issues out. And I said, the smart thing to do would be to just make every issue number one. And I was kind of laughing at the concept of that. And then I just kept thinking about it, and I'm like, well, it's a comedy book. We could kind of do that for a while. And it just kept, it sort of stuck in my craw until I decided to tell Image, I think we're going to do this. So.
And then you went straight to number 100 to end the series, right?
That's right. Same kind of deal, you know, the idea that a lot of times when there's an anniversary coming up, they'll kind of do this weird superhero math where they'll count up every miniseries, every annual, and they'll say, oh, it's the 400th issue of something, you know. And I thought, well, whatever. I want Skull Kickers to end with a big digit, and we'll just do that because we can. And then there's an in-story reason for it as well, which made it even more fun.
Right. Any chance of a Wayward Skull Kickers crossover?
No, they're very, very different books, and I wouldn't want to kind of change the dynamic that makes them their own thing. You know, I think that they work really well as what they are, and there's no plans for more Skull Kickers right now. It's near and dear to me, and it's amazing having a body of work where we took it from, you know, start to finish. And I really feel so good that we were able to tell the story the way we wanted, you know, when we wanted. And I don't currently have any plans to bring the Skull Kickers back. I really like having that nice solid block of here's the finished thing, you know?
Yeah, definitely. So besides those two kind of being your more prominent, like, creator-owned stuff, you've done a lot of stuff for other companies. You have
right.
a good body of work building at Marvel, and you've done, of course, Samurai Jack, and then a lot of like Pathfinder and other kind of D&D books.
Yeah.
What has been your experience with working on licensed properties versus creator-owned?
I like doing both. Like, I know some people are very militant about one or the other, and I find that they kind of it's like different exercises. Like, you're stretching different creative muscles when you're working on creator-owned stuff or work for hire. You're trying different things, you're building, and you're working within someone else's sandbox, and that helps generate ideas that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. So it kind of pushes you to try different things or to make different stories, and it makes you a better, you know, creator and a better writer. So I like doing both. The fact that I get to do a creator-owned series at the same time as I'm doing, you know, multiple work for hire projects, I feel very fortunate. I try not to take that for granted, because I feel like they kind of feed off of each other in terms of the energy that gets generated. and when one's not working, I still got to get, my deadlines. I still got to hit the mark. And so I can push myself with the other one, or I'll just, okay, I'm going to take a break and step back and let's look at, the other one and see if I can take a fresh stab at the latest story or whatever. And so they really do kind of complement each other in different ways, or they kind of drive me in different respects. And I've learned a lot from doing both types of work, and being on the clock, making sure you're hitting the mark, trying to, something like Samurai Jack, where, I didn't come up with it, but I want to be respectful of that source material. And I want to make sure that I'm telling a story that feels like a Samurai Jack story, that whether or not you ever read anything else I've done, but Samurai Jack, you will feel that we delivered on what that concept is. That means a lot to me, to hit the mark, and for people to be like, that felt just like the cartoon, or that really exemplified those things, rather than it being like, I'm going to put a Jim Zub stamp all over it and you won't be able to see the source. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. So another part of your kind of mark or stamp, if you will, on the industry is kind of how open you are about your experiences as a creator.
Yeah, it's that kind of happened by accident, I guess. I do teach, so I teach at an art college here in Toronto called Seneca. They've got a really fantastic animation program, and I've been a part of the faculty since 2004. And so I just kind of fall into this weird, I hate to say teacher mindset, but it is a little bit of that, where if someone asks me a question about how something is done, my natural inclination is to sort of break it down into little, steps. Like, I want to be able to tell you, I want to be able to teach someone, or at least this is my experience in something. And so it just sort of naturally grew out of that. I was being asked on Twitter about the process of writing comics, and I realized, oh man, like, I can't just 140 character tweets are not really going to cover this. And so I started putting together some of my thoughts on it in some blog posts, and those really kind of took off. Like, a lot of people shared them, a lot more people than I was expecting. And they just sort of, I hate to use the term went viral, because it's not like it was, change the world kind of stuff, but they went around, and a bunch of people read them, and quite a few editors complimented me and said, this is really good advice, and I would share this with other freelancers and just things like that. And so it sort of kind of grew out of that, really. In addition to the weird little pragmatic element of it, where if someone asks me a pretty common question, like, how do you write a comic script, or how do you pitch a story, and I write it up extensively one time, and then I have it, then anytime anyone ever asks me, I never have to rewrite it. I can just point them towards those articles and say, this is what I know. And if this is useful to you, awesome. But if not, I don't have anything else to give you. You know what I mean? So there is sort of a weird kind of, I wouldn't say it's a time-saving device. I mean, it's time-saving for answering questions, but time-saving sort of aggregate, so I don't have to answer the same question over and over and over again.
I was going to ask you, too, part of that is, did you find it difficult with the lack of information when you were starting out? Does some of it stem from there as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a sense that, I don't know, I don't think anyone's intentionally trying to obfuscate the information. I mean, a lot of people don't talk about sales numbers or economics of making money and create their own comics, and I think that's a mixture of a lot of creative people don't have a business mindset, and also the fact that I think everyone's a little bit afraid of not sounding like they're a huge success all the time. You know what I mean? But yeah, there isn't a lot of that stuff. And if there is, it's not very well organized, or it tends to be kind of this weird, I would find little bits and pieces of people's scripts that had been published in the backs of books or things like that, rather than like nice, solid, this is how you write a comic. And so it wasn't like I was going in like I'm going to be the authority on this stuff by any means. And I still don't feel like that's the case. I feel like everyone's going to learn their own way. You know, you might take some advice from what I'm teaching or what my own experiences, but you're still going to have to kind of do it yourself. At some point, you're going to find methods that work that are different than me, and that's good, you know? But if I can sort of steer you away from some really common mistakes or answer some questions that should be a little bit more obvious, you know, so much the better.
Have you had anybody come up to you and thank you, whether at shows or online, that's like legitimately said, this has helped me so much, thank you so much for doing this?
Yeah, actually, it's I don't want to sound ungrateful. It happens a lot now. Like when I leave most conventions, I usually have probably anywhere from 5 to 20 comics that people have given me, self-published stuff or you know, indie books or books they kickstarted or things like that people are bringing over because they want me to check it out. And they've said, you know, I read your tutorials, or, you know, I pitched this based on, you know, the way that you said to pitch a book, and it got picked up. And so, yeah, the first few times it happened, it really, really threw me off. And not that I take it for granted by any means, but my wife kind of joked about it when we were leaving New York Comic Con. She was like, are you going to be able to pack all these comics? Because, you know, there was like probably 20 or 25, you know, self-published comics that I've been given over the course of the weekend.
I think that's really awesome that they do thank you and they're grateful for this help, because I really think that you are kind of one of the only people who is so open about your experiences and how, you know, since comics are rising in popularity, I imagine more and more people will continue to want to get into the industry, but there's not a whole lot of resources to help them do that.
Ever. Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing feeling, and it's really kind of strange because, you know, I don't want to come off like some half-baked guru. Like, I don't have all the answers. You know, I'm still figuring out what being in this creative career is all about, and every year I feel like I'm learning more and I'm kind of growing in terms of my own skills and understanding. And so I never want to come across like, I'll tell you the one true way, or, you know, this is the only way to do it. If you're doing it this way, you're wrong. Like, I don't want it ever to feel like that. I just want to say, hey, these are my experiences so far, and this is stuff I've noticed. If it's helpful to you, you know, awesome. And that's always the way I've kind of looked at the advice.
Great, and I think that is the best way. We have a question from the audience. One of our followers on Twitter, he asked us, so he really asked you. He says, with writers, I always want to know how planned out the story is they're working on. Do they have a very specific beginning, middle, and end?
The middle is always variable. You know, and with creator-owned stuff, I feel like I've got a little more control over that, obviously, because I'm going to be the person making the final decision. With work for hire stuff, when you're working on someone else's property, you've always got to kind of realize that there's a point where it's not up to you. And ideally, that doesn't come to pass. You're not going to come to loggerheads and do or die on it. But you still need to be able to divorce yourself from it and say, okay, this is what I want to do. Here's how I'm justifying it. Is that okay? And understanding that even if they give you permission initially, they can change their mind. Things can you know, change when someone else is holding the strings on it and someone else gets final approval. And so you have to work in this business, you can't, you know, go into you got to figure out what hills you're willing to die on. You know what I mean? And so I try and plan things out as extensively as I can. I try and be as thorough as I can, but I also want to leave myself open to what the client wants, and also, you know, the opportunity to come up with better ideas in the moment. And that's something you don't want to discount. Like, there's something to be said for planning, and planning is really important. Having a plot, having a theme, knowing the major events and where it's going. But there's something when you're in the actual trenches doing it, you know, you suddenly realize a synergy in the story that you didn't see before, or you suddenly realize the perfect line of dialogue that will just put a button on this whole scene. even if it means it's going to change some of the overall story. And being able to be organic about that and ride those out is one of the most enjoyable parts of being a creative person and a storyteller, is that as much as I know the plan can change, you know, and this stuff can grow. You know, they sometimes authors will kind of use these analogies like the characters are telling them that they need to go a different way. And I wouldn't, you know, get really artsy fartsy about it, but there is a bit of that where you just feel like this is a better choice, or I just realized this thing about the story that I hadn't seen before. And so I do plan quite a bit, and I tend to be a planner. I've got a pretty tight plot. I usually have pacing sheets figured out for each issue, you know, for an entire arc all at once. But in that moment, when I'm actually writing, sometimes you'll just be pulled in different directions or realize you've got to alter that plan and ride it out. And that's a kind of an exciting and fun feeling when you realize you're going off road for a little bit, and you're going to see what kind of, you know, things happen out there.
Awesome. And the question continues. There's one more part to it. He asks, when it comes to working with artists, I'm always curious if a writer is pure script, Marvel method, or a bit of both. What is your preference?
So I do full script. And so I write every panel, every angle, everything. And that's sort of the way I've just naturally done it all the way along. But that isn't to say that the artist doesn't have input. So I always say to every artist I'm working with, here's how I see it in my kind of head. Like, this is the visual that I have as I'm writing, but please, you know, talk to me. Let me know if you've got a better way to stage this. Let me know if you've got something burning that you need to get out on this page in a way that I hadn't thought of. You know, this is a collaboration, and that's really important to me, that they've got a say and they've got a voice. It's not just like an art robot that I'm programming to spit out the things that I told it to. It's really about us working together, and we both got our names on this thing, and we're going to, you know, take this to the finish line together. So let's both be really proud of the work we're doing and how we're doing it. And that it leads to the best quality overall. Nothing is ever going to be exactly how you imagined it in your mind. It's just not possible, right? So the minute that you put it into physical being, you have to compromise anyway. So let's make a compromise that's going to make the best possible version of that thing, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. And that question comes from @Jeremy Maggart Art on Twitter.
Cool.
So what I like to do at the end of interviews, as you've seen before, is to end with some fun questions, some kind of just goofy stuff. So sure. Question number 1, when you enter a buffet, what is the first food item that you head for?
Oh my God. At the buffet, I probably go, unfortunately, for something deep fried. I'm probably lured to the grease. Although I don't, when I'm at a buffet, I've already mentally decided that this is not going to be an evening for health. And so I probably just indulge right from the get-go.
Awesome. What is your spirit animal?
My spirit animal? That's a good question. God, I don't know now. It's weird. I don't know. I'm totally blanking on this right now. My spirit animal is probably like a Dungeons and Dragons owl bear.
Awesome. That's a really good answer.
Because it's like moronic and yet somehow capable, and not at all what people expect.
And finally, what video game, book, and comic series would you take with you into a fallout shelter?
Oh God, these questions. Movie, something really long, because if I'm going to be watching it for the rest of time, it's probably going to have to be long so that it's going to keep me entertained. So maybe like, oh man. And I know as soon as I say it, I'm going to like think of something better later on. let's say, does it have to be one movie? Can it be a series of movies?
Yeah, why not?
Sure. So we'll say the Godfather 1 and 2.
Okay.
Long and involved and character-driven and ridiculous. Not ridiculous, but like intense. Book? Oy. Oh, jeez. I don't know. Probably the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook, so that I can run games for everyone in the Fallout shelter.
I like it. And finally, what comic series?
Again, something very long, so that I have a lot to read. So even though I've never read it, I'm going to say One Piece, because there's like 50 volumes of that or something?
There's an infinite amount of
An
volumes of that
infinite
book.
number of great. So I'd have an infinite number of manga for me to read, because I'd be reading One Piece.
They'd probably still be publishing it too during the
That's right.
war.
They'd still be publishing it. That's right.
Awesome. So where can people find you online?
So nice and simple, just my name. So jimzub.com. So JIMZUB.com. And I'm also on Twitter under Jim Zub, JIMZUB. You can tweet at me and I probably respond. You can ask me questions or all kinds of stuff. My website's filled to the brim with interviews and info and links to all my books and information about what conventions I'm attending and things like that, as well as a slew of tutorials on how to make comics, how to market comics, some of the economics of making creator-owned comics.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for your time. And congratulations on all your success. I can't wait to see what else comes your way.
Thank you. I've got a new creator-owned book that's going to be coming this summer, and I am really stoked for people to see that and the new Dungeons & Dragons and Thunderbolts.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Jim. Take care.
No problem, man. Take care of yourself.
You have been listening to Pulpcast, the official podcast of thepulpmedia.com. You can email questions that we'll answer in future episodes to thepulpmediaus@gmail.com. Also, please check out our website, thepulpmedia.com, for reviews, articles, and more.